Soundstripe.
All right.
Soundstripe.
Hi, my name is Jasmine, aka Girl in a Van, and this is a video all about how to build a recording studio inside your own van. My upstairs neighbours are doing renovations and it's very annoying because it is a Sunday morning, but here we go. So, when it comes to aims of the project, I think the best thing you can start with any project is to set out your aims, know exactly what you want from the build, exactly what you personally as a writer or an artist want. I primarily write with guitar and vocals, so those are really the only live sounds that I would need to sound good in my space. I'm also a surf instructor, so the layout of my van was very important to me because I also wasn't working with a lot of space. As I'm sure you know, T4s are, I think they're 2.49 meters and 1 by 1.6 and 1.4. So you're not working with a lot of room like you would be if you were building a normal home studio. So for me, that broke down into 3 key things. I needed storage, I needed my surfboards to be able to fit, and I needed guitar and voice to sound good once I'd done the whole acoustic treatment. This video isn't going to be specific in terms of the technical parts of the build. I will talk you through how I did it roughly, and we'll sort of go rough guidelines of how I got the bed and the ceiling, things like that, but it's going to be much more specific to soundproofing elements and details on acoustic treatment as well. So primarily focusing on getting that sound to sound good rather than the actual build itself, if that makes sense. I hope it does. I will link some videos down below as well, other YouTube videos that I've used personally to build my van that I think are great, and hopefully you guys will find that really helpful too. My van is a VW, it is a Volkswagen 2003 T4. Super reliable, great little vans. If you've never bought a van and you're looking to buy a van and do a recording studio conversion, I would highly recommend them. They're great, super quick, don't rust easily, generally have good resale value as well. My van had a previous conversion in it. I had done it very budget. I think I spent about £350 on it, give or take, 2 years ago. So very DIY, sort of rusty plywood and, just not great, let's put it that way. So all of that had to come out before I could start anything. The only part of the van I did want to keep, because I knew that I had actually done that properly in the initial build, was the carpet and the floor. So unfortunately that won't be included in this video. However, I will link a video to someone doing their own carpet and floor. Effectively, you will need to use the same method that we're going to talk through in this video for the walls and the ceiling, and just transfer it to carpet and plywood and insulation for the floor. But we'll get onto that later, so don't need to worry about that right now. So my budget for this project was roughly 1,000. I was willing to stretch that up to 1,200 depending. I ended up being just under budget, so I did very well, which is good because I was expecting to be hugely over it and have to take lots of extra work shifts, but I wasn't, so winning all round. So that budget was more than enough to get me the materials for the interior, to do the acoustic treatment. I did already have a couple of things for the van, so I feel like I should mention that just quickly. So my mattress was reused from the previous build, and a couple of bits of plywood that weren't mouldy were reused as well, so obviously that cheapened the cost of things. And I did try and recycle things as much as possible, just because I think, as most people who live in vans do, that sustainability is obviously quite important, and we should, do our bit where we can. So I did use a lot of things that I had already used or that I'd, pulled out of dumpsters, things like that. So I would recommend doing a bit of dumpster diving yourself. Facebook Marketplace, also a great resource for things like apple crates or wood that people don't want anymore. This video that you're watching is the first in a 2-part series. So the first video, this video right now, is going to be all about the soundproofing of the van, the initial build, so the bed frame, the cabinets, all of that kind of stuff, how I insulated the walls and ceiling, how I double skinned them as well. Don't worry if you don't understand any of these terms, we're going to get into that in a minute. And the second video is going to be more about the acoustic treatment, so that's treating the space once it's sort of got the bulk of the framework in. And it will also include the finished reveal, the final reveal if you like, as well as a couple of tips and things I would do if I had more space to work with, or if I was doing the project over, because obviously We will learn as we go along, as you will see by the end of the second video. Just a quick water break, it's very hot today. So, as some of you may be aware, and some of you may not if you haven't bought your van yet, but you will soon find out, the way a van works is you have the exterior, obviously, which is metal. When you step inside an empty van that has no framework in it, nothing like that, it's obviously metal on the inside as well. So that tends to be very hollow. It's very sort of sound transfer. It happens very easily. You get a lot of vibrations as well when you're driving that sort of come up and vibrate in the metal. So overall, it's not a great space to be in. It's not good for sound. It's very echoey, very sort of bassy and just not nice, very metallic as well. It's just not a great sound. However, what it does mean is that you have the capability to create something called a second skin, otherwise known as decoupling, which is a very common method for sound studios, recording studios, and exactly what we want. So it's a great place to start, and I'm going to explain how to build your second skin now. So why build a second skin? Why decouple your walls? Why go to all that time and effort and cost? You know, what are the benefits? So you may not know this, you might do. If you're a musician, you probably will. The way sound works is it travels as vibrations through kinetic energy in the air. So in order to prevent that transfer of noise, we need to interrupt that vibration somehow. And that is why we decouple walls. So the way that decoupling works is if you imagine you have an exterior wall, so in a van that's obviously going to be the metal framework of the van, and an interior wall that are detached, so you've got a nice little air pocket between them. That interior wall in your van might be clad, like I chose to do mine. It might be carpeted, you know, you can kind of do whatever you want with it. I'm going to talk you through what I chose to do with it and why, but obviously feel free to get your own ideas and go for that. But the most important thing is that you have that exterior wall, the interior wall, and a nice little air gap between them. Now, obviously you can't have that interior wall just floating. That wouldn't really work. It would sort of fall back, fall forward, you'd punch a hole in it, just not great all around. So the way that you're going to sort of attach those two is through battens. So in the diagram, you'll see they're kind of intermittently sort of put in there. So the main thing that you don't want is to have complete transfer. So you don't want batten here to touch batten there and to all be connected so that the sound has super easy pathways to go through. You want to make it as hard as you can for that vibration to travel. The second part of decoupling, or sort of combined with decoupling, I suppose is the better way of describing it, is adding mass. And what adding mass does is it helps with sound absorption. So obviously we're trying to prevent these sound waves from traveling between exterior and interior. We've already talked about the interruption, but the other way to stop that is by absorption. So you've got your two walls, you've got your interior, your exterior, and you've got these studs between. The next thing you're going to do is add mass in between. So in my van, we're going to talk about what I did now. So when it came to choosing materials for my van, and specifically for this, for the decoupling, there were some key things that I had to think about. One of which was condensation, but specifically in a van, because you're in such a tight space that your body heat is obviously heating up the inside very quickly. They tend to have high humidity, and so condensation is a real issue. Obviously, if you're living in your van, you don't really want condensation, but it would also cause damage to my equipment, which is obviously a key problem. So I did a little bit of research and I came across a custom MDF company called Matchboard. I'll link them down below. And they build custom MDF that is moisture resistant. It also looks like cladding, so it's visually very appealing, and that's what I chose to use. So Matchboard obviously make customized MDF. MDF is a great material to use for soundproofing. Matchboard specifically has a really high density, and it also has an STC rating of 8. If you don't know what STC means, it's the sound transmission class. It's a very common way of sort of rating a material's ability to stop airborne sound, commonly used in the US. Despite the fact that it was fairly expensive, because I was using it in large sheets rather than cladding it individually as planks of wood, it actually cheapened the cost as opposed to cladding the whole walls in MDF, which would have been really expensive and not moisture resistant. In order to create my decoupled walls, my stud walls, whatever you want to call them, in my van, I'm very lucky. T4s have a metal framework which kind of is concave, you'll see in the clips. So I only had to add a couple of battens in to be able to fix the MDF up against. The MDF is 6mm thick, so it bends nice and easily, so you can get it sort of in against the curvature of the van. I used self-tapping screws, nice and easy. We did have to drill a couple of sort of holes in first to get it in, but I first cut the MDF board to size. Luckily for me, in my previous build, I had already got wood on the walls, so I had templates to use. If you don't have that, I would recommend just using cardboard and kind of holding it up, drawing it out roughly, and using that as a template. All in all, pretty good method. The walls were fairly easy to put in. The key part of this stage and the decoupling of the wall is that adding of mass, which we talked about earlier. So for me, I chose to use Havelock insulation, Havelock insulation. It doesn't say how to pronounce it on the website. I will link that down below. They're a great company. So the insulation is made out of sheep's wool. It's super dense. It's moisture resistant, obviously a great thing as well. And it also has an NRC rating of 9, which is again a great rating. That's the noise reduction, the UK one that we talked about previously. So that's a great option. You could also use Dial insulation roll. You can find that on B&Q's website. That's also great for moisture resistance because it's made out of recycled plastic bottles. There are a couple of different options. Obviously cost is a part of that, so whichever is more affordable for you, go for that one. The key part of the insulation is adding the mass. Anything else is just a bonus tagged on to the end of it. So moving on to the carpet. In my van I was very lucky. The previous owner had already fully decoupled the floor from the exterior floor. He'd done this by laying kind of wooden struts or battens along the floor, filling those gaps with insulation, and adding MDF, actually I believe it was plywood, either would work, on the top of those struts, and then carpet on top of that, so you had sort of 3 or 4 layers of material for sound to go through. But I will link a video down below of someone doing a similar thing, just so you have a rough idea of how to do it, and there's a diagram up above me, hopefully, if editing me has got it right, that shows you kind of how to lay those struts so that you have that support but you're not allowing sound transfer easily. Obviously with the roof, you don't want to lose a lot of the height of the van, so decoupling this is you need to get a much closer gap between the exterior and the interior wall. Obviously this isn't great for sound transfer because the closer the gap, the quicker it's gonna, sort of the easier, if you like, it will transfer. However, because space was so critical in my build, I chose to kind of narrow that gap because I knew I'd done the walls and I knew the carpet was done properly as well. For my roof materials, I chose to use pallet wood. I pulled apart a bunch of pallets very painfully, very slowly, and then sanded them down just to get that nice finish. The reason I chose to use pallet wood is because I knew it would be slightly different lengths, slightly different depths, and slightly different widths, so that when that was clad into the roof of my van, you would have almost the effect of diffusion. So sound hitting it would hit those different angles and be diffused more naturally, rather than sort of going back and forth between the carpet and the roof that were both flush and getting sort of flutter echoes and weird frequency boosts that obviously you don't want in your studio. In order to attach the pallet wood, I use the batten method. So similarly as the walls and the floor, you're just going to want to attach battens across. I did them sort of intermittently. I think there are about 5 off the top of my head, sort of running along the length of the van, or the width of the van, but lengthways. And then what you do then is you just attach the pallet wood, nice and easy, once you've sort of sanded it and cut it down to size, and you screw it into those battens. Obviously you can't screw it straight into the metal exterior because your screws will sort of poke out the top. So most vans will have general framework as well. I believe I've got a clip of it, should be showing now, that you'll screw those battens into and then the wood into as well, so you don't get screws poking out your roof, because nobody wants that, and it would compromise the structural integrity of the sound and just generally your van. You'd probably have a leaky roof then. Because the insulation that I used for the walls and that had also been used in the floor previously was that kind of thicker, sort of woollier kind, I didn't want to use that in the roof because, well, it wouldn't have fit. So I used YBS thermal insulation. It looks like silver bubble wrap. It's a great option for van insulation generally, really good for moisture prevention as well because it's sort of sealed off. And it's a lot thinner, so if you're struggling with walls and things like that, or even if you wanted to add more insulation into your walls, if you had more space to work with, you could double layer the Havelock insulation and that insulation and get kind of another layer sandwiched in there. But that's what I chose to use just because of, again, the spatial issue that I had. So now I've decoupled my floor, you've decoupled your ceiling, and you've decoupled your walls, so you've created a second skin effectively. You've helped prevent moisture and condensation. but you've also prevented that sound transfer between interior and exterior, and hopefully nothing, or as little as possible, is touching between those two walls. So the next step is to attack the windows. Depending on the state of your van, when you buy it, most windows will already be sealed in with a cork or, kind of a glue sealant. When I started this project, the first thing I did was check the windows and check how tightly they were secured. My cork was still very much intact, still perfect as van windows can be anyway. So I chose not to rip them out just because the cost, if I did it wrong, of repairing it would be quite a lot. I decided to just leave them as was and treat the windows later. However, if your sealant is damaged or you would like to reseal them, I would recommend using something like green glue, which is a sound dampening glue, and that will again help with that soundproofing and prevent that exterior and interior transfer. Depending on your van, some sprinters and larger vans have wind mirrors that kind of allow you to see your blind spots, so you could potentially board up your windows and create, again, a second skin effect. In my van, unfortunately, I need the windows to drive because I am not the best driver in the world anyway, so I didn't want to do this, but that is an option if you are a superior driver or, again, you have those specialised wing mirrors. So, as discussed previously many times, because it was probably the biggest hitch or, hindrance of this project, space was a huge problem for me. I did not have a lot to work with and I had a lot of needs to sort of cram into it. Therefore, for me, layout was a really critical part of my build. I decided on an L-shaped bed. Hopefully there'll be a diagram above me if editing me is on it. So you can kind of see my layout and see the design for it, but effectively it would be an L-shaped sofa/bed that would pull out into a full double. I needed some kind of storage for shoes, odd bits, makeup, that sort of thing, that would come in the form of a shoe rack, a slightly taller cabinet to put food and cooking equipment in, all of that kind of stuff. The bed needed to be high enough, obviously, to be able to get my guitar, recording equipment and clothes underneath, and I kind of wanted some sort of storage as well on the opposite wheel arch, just so that I had, space for books, water bottle when you're asleep, all of that kind of stuff. So the bed itself is kind of, I suppose, in two parts. So you have the fixed back part of the bed. This is just held up by legs. Basically what we did is create kind of runners of wood that were wedged effectively between the two side walls of the van. Those are supported by legs, and then it's just nice and simple piece of plywood cut to shape on the top. So that was the easiest part of the bed to build, besides obviously doing all the measuring. We got a couple of measurements wrong, but mistakes happen. Always buy extra wood, lesson learned. The other part of the bed is a slat bed. So I've linked the video down below that I used as a reference. There are loads of videos on YouTube, all sort of great, really good instructions, but effectively the way that it works is you have alternating bits of wood that are attached to two frames, and so that when you pull one frame out, it kind of slots and you end up with wood there and wood there. You'll be able to see this in the final video and in diagrams as well that I'll pop up on the screen. But yeah, so that was great. That allowed me to have a double bed when I wanted it, but also a single bed / couch as well for recording and when it's just me in the van. The other benefit to having a L-shaped bed, besides obviously conservation of space, is that it allowed my mattress to be in 3 parts, which will be critical in the second episode of this series. So hopefully you guys come back and then you can find out why I chose to do that. Because time was sort of a crunch, time was of the essence on this project, I did get a friend to custom build my cabinets. Thank you to Jacob, huge thanks, lifesaver. So once the initial build is done, once you've decoupled your walls and you've added your mass, you've built your bed and your storage, however you guys would choose to do them, whether you do them like I did or another way, that's kind of it for the soundproofing. You've added your mass, you've used the absorption, and you've prevented that sound transfer as to the best of your ability. That's sort of it for that stage, and the next stage is to acoustically treat that space, which is what we're going to be covering in the next episode, so stick around for that, hopefully come back. In that episode, at the end, I will also be including some tips and tricks, things that I would do in the future for sort of future builds, things I learned from this build, and those tips will also include a couple of things on soundproofing, so come back if you want those. But that's all we have for this episode, so follow me on social media, Instagram, @girlinavanmusic, and yeah, come back for part 2.
Sounds